I just want to share something with you all today. A few years ago, a number of people were saying to me, "There's what's changed in you. There's a significant change in your life that we see." And there were obviously a number of things, from my disability being really bad and me being in a wheelchair or bedridden a lot of the time. There were other things like me having counselling for my PTSD that I'd had my whole life. And there was some very painful experiences that I experienced, but being treated by people a certain way. But the big thing, I think, really is a sort of paradigm shift in how I think about power, how I think about leadership, how I think about relationships, and how I think about church ministry. And I just really want to share that with you today, because stuff keeps coming up, and I just feel like I need to have a video that I can just share with people. Look, this is my experience. This is how I had this paradigm shift. These are the things I saw, the red flags I saw, things in me and things in the culture that I want to highlight today. So I've got some notes so I can try and keep this concise, but I'm also not too sure how this is going to come out. Firstly, I myself was trained over the years and discipled with a male-centric approach and a leader-centric approach. The way I was discipled and trained was that as a leader, people are going to give you a hard time. You are the victim in church life. I was also taught women are going to try and seduce you. I was taught pastors have affairs, not that pastors abuse people. If you don't understand that, that will come clearer later on. I wasn't really taught anything about how I might misuse my power. Instead, everything was from the point of view of you as the pastor. This stuff's going to come at you and give you a hard time, and you need to defend against it. Now, I had a background in the Charismatic Church and the Pentecostal Church and in the Anglo-Catholic Church. And I saw abuses in those spaces. I saw abuses of power, abuses of money, and abuses of sex. And when I then discovered Reformed theology, I thought I'd now found a healthy group to be a part of. And sadly, that wasn't actually the case, even though there's lots of things about Reformed theology doctrinally that I hold to. The culture of it that I saw in the UK and the United States at times has been unhealthy, and I will address some of that stuff in a minute. So some of you know that I had counselling for my PTSD that I had had for my whole life. And as a result of that counselling, I lost the hypervigilance that I'd had, which was a big game changer. But also the experience I had of being cared for, from having people say, "We're going to take care of you right now," really was life-changing, made me feel like a new man. And the amount of love that I received when I was vulnerable and hurting really made me wanting to love and care for other people more. But at the same time, I felt that in my tribe, sort of like theological tribe, church tribe, I don't mean local church, but the wider church group, it didn't seem very conducive to being loving and caring to hurting people, because there were these red flags I saw. So one red flag, a really big one, was a pastor boasting to me that he had physically threatened one of his elders because this elder kept disagreeing with him, and boasting that once he physically threatened him, the guy never disagreed with him again. Another red flag was the whole Mark Driscoll thing. When it started becoming public about how Mark Driscoll was treating people in his church, that was quite big. I'd already had suspicions of him. I'd already felt like he is not the model of masculinity that I want to follow. Like I do not want to be like him. Any ways that I was like him, I felt like I need to turn away from that and be more sanctified. I was concerned about Mark Driscoll's misogyny. But it was when I started reading blog posts by a guy called Throckmorton. I've forgotten his first name. Is it Warren Throckmorton? I started reading the stuff that he was saying about Mark Driscoll, and it really opened my eyes. And then I started finding other bloggers who were writing about stuff. And I can't remember the chronological order of when I come across them, but there was Julie Ann Smith, Defend the Sheep. There was Dee Parsons. There was Wenatchee, The Hatchet. And there was also a survivor website for people who come out of the Mars Hill Church in Seattle. And I started finding out about the church culture at Mark Driscoll's church. Started thinking about how some of those things would be in our church as well, and in our broader constitution, and even in books I'd read, where it was encouraged as positive stuff. And I was worried about a friend who to me looked like he was becoming like Driscoll. So I had concerns about these things, and that was quite a pivotal thing for me, looking at the whole Mark Driscoll thing and being like, okay, he's acting like a bully, and I'm seeing a lot of people around him who act like that, and I see people in Acts 29 who act like that. I don't want to be like that, and I don't want any of my friends to be like that. I want to try and help them move away from that model. Another red flag was the Gospel Coalition website. They had a blog there, and one key blog post was huge. It was the one about Joe Paterno, when there'd been child abuse at Penn State, and how Joe Paterno had been complicit. And the article talked about all the good that Joe Paterno did in a way that was making it seem as if we can minimize the bad he did. It was just a small mistake because of all the good he's done, and something along the lines. Well, then it was basically calling out the people who were calling Joe Paterno out, and saying that they were being judgmental, doing character assassination of the people who were calling for justice. And I found it deeply troubling, because I was like, in my own childhood abuse, there were people who were complicit. And to know that a well-known Christian blog would actually normalize that and make it seem like that is okay, and try and instead point the finger at the people who were calling out the injustice. That was a huge red flag to me. And then I noticed from the Gospel Coalition website that there was a consistent message from blog posts every now and then that was saying, don't listen to the gal bloggers. I think that was what they would call them, which is a troublesome term, but blogs written by women. Now, some of the women who I'd learned so much from before, people like Julie Ann Smith, Dee Parsons, and whatnot. As a survivor of abuse, I was shocked that where there were women who were acting like Christ and calling out abuse and exposing what is done in the darkness, like it says in the New Testament, that there was this really popular Christian blog that kept blog site. I realize there's multiple blogs on it. On the Gospel Coalition website, they kept on telling people, don't listen to these bloggers have got issues and whatnot. So that was a big red flag for our constituency. Now, there was a whole bunch of red flags with the really painful experience me and my wife had, which, I wrote a blog about it called Broken Hearted by Many Paper Cuts. I'll put a link at the bottom. That experience was a huge red flag, because I was like, okay, if I share my abuse story with people, it makes me vulnerable, and the way people then turn around and treat you is horrific. If I'm suddenly in a wheelchair and incapacitated, the way people who should help you treat you is horrific. And even how I saw people try to turn me and my wife against one another and lie to us. It was horrific. So that was a whole bunch of red flags there, where I was like, if me, a church leader in our constituency, could get hurt so badly, how much could other people be hurt, particularly when they're not church leaders? And I think then I kind of vowed, I'm never going to be like that. Like I don't ever want to be like that. I don't want to be on the receiving end of what I was on the receiving end of. And for the first time, I thought, what is it like to sit on the other side of the table to a church leader? What does it feel like? And it got me thinking about ways that I've been harsh, ways that I haven't been sensitive enough with people, haven't handled them delicately enough with people. And if you look at part 2 of my blog post on that, you'll see where I talk about things that I had to say sorry to people about. So another red flag that is linked into that is the whole thing of defensiveness. I saw church leaders be so defensive when I tried to gently approach them about how they treated me and my wife. And that was a huge red flag. And I was like, the doctrine of justification doesn't seem to be being applied, because if we really know that our righteousness comes from Christ, then we can own up to our sin. We don't need to be defensiveness, because we've got Jesus's breastplate of righteousness as our defense. So as I saw that was going all across the constituency, that really concerned me. I was also really concerned by the ostracization, the blacklisting that I experienced, where you start hearing from people that your name has come up at meetings and that people are saying stuff about you. And, that was quite concerning. And it actually closed up opportunities for us to partner with people in ministry, which was really, really sad. At the same time, I was seeing people leaving churches because of character problems, but then they were given ministry posts in other churches, and those churches wouldn't even check with the former church. So the biggest example of this was with Tullian Tüchevin. Sorry if I mispronounced his name. In America, abused women in one church and then went to another church and did ministry in another church. And I was shocked that this was going on, but I saw it happening in the UK church as well. Someone can do something wrong. Someone can be a man can be inappropriate with a woman where there's a power differential there, okay, which is basically abuse, and then can end up going on and getting a position of responsibility in another church. I found that churches in the UK, at least in my circles, they normally don't contact the former church. I think we've only ever had one church where, of their own initiative, they've contacted us and said, someone left your church, came to our church. We just want to check that there aren't any issues there. Now, I realize that in some cases, if someone's come from an abusive church, then that's a different kettle of fish. Like, you don't want their former church to know where they are. You want them to be safe. I understand that. But in general, all things being equal, we should have churches check in that someone hasn't abused people in the former church. Now, linked with that, I saw allegations of sex abuse cover-ups in churches, really credible allegations of sex abuse cover-ups, where household names were mentioned: C.J. Mahaney, Matt Chandler, Brian Laritz, and seeing very little done about it. As I started looking into these things, the more I dug, the more I found out, the more troubled I was. Then you start seeing things like fake doctorates and stuff. It was very, very troubling. With Matt Chandler, I saw the video of him shouting, "You narcissistic zero," and hearing the people laugh. And I watched that and I was like, no, this is a huge, huge red flag. Like, why isn't something being done on that? Why are these people being put up there as our heroes, as our role models, when they still seem to have this, either that more of the Mark Driscoll culture, or it's not, you can't blame it all on Mark Driscoll culture, but a culture of hurting people in ministry, and a culture of, when there's abuse, covering it up and people getting more and more hurt through it. And sometimes church discipline being done on the victims. This is no small thing, and this was shocking to me. Huge red flag. Terrible. Now, At the same time, for myself, I was repenting of harshness and repenting of being judgmental, realizing that one of the reasons why I got hurt from people was because I helped foster a judgmental culture. And you give judgment, you receive judgment. So I really repented of that judgmentalism and of the self-righteousness that I had, which I think for our tribe, self-righteousness is something where, for those of us who are in the Reformed camp, if we're naturally self-righteous, it feels like a good place to be because we feel like we're in the right because we've got so much doctrine, so much deep theology, so it can feel right. But sometimes it's a positioning ourselves against other people who we say, oh, they're in the wrong. And we enjoy being in the right, which again goes against the whole thing of being clothed with Jesus' righteousness instead of our own righteousness. So I really had to do a lot of repenting of that. I still do. I'm not saying, now I'm some amazing holy man. I'm not saying that. I'm just sharing my process with you. At the same time, I recognized that we had a leader-centric approach to ministry in my circles, that I had grown up with that, where everything was about the leader and from the perspective of the leader, which isn't healthy. So I started saying, I'm only going to read stuff, whether it's books or blog posts or Twitter. I'm only going to read stuff by women because I've been listening to men for years. I want to hear more women. I mean, I had listened to some women in the past, but it was a huge imbalance. And I'm only going to listen to other ethnicities. I've heard loads of white people over the years. I've heard loads of theology from white people. Let me listen to other ethnicities, which I did actually have in my background, particularly coming from Pentecostal church as well, obviously in London. But I wanted to do more of that. I didn't want to hear any white middle class authors because I'd already heard so much of that already. And from this process, I really started hearing people, really started hearing how much people were hurting. I learned how church membership agreements were being used to hurt people and used to protect leaders when they shouldn't be protected. And I was really shocked by that. And then I started seeing how people in cases of abuse were saying that, children would have to go one-on-one with the abuser, and how people are saying, oh, unless there's more evidence, unless there's other witnesses, you shouldn't do anything about it. And that was clearly ludicrous. And if you do exegesis of what it says in the pastoral epistles and in Matthew 18, it's clear that the Bible is not saying that. So I just started seeing that these Bible verses were being used in a way to protect people in power and not helping the vulnerable and hurting, and particularly not helping people who'd been abused. So then I realized that my take on church hurt wasn't quite correct, because I used to think, look, if you've been hurt in a church, that's real and that's valid, but just find another church to go to. And I started understanding that actually sometimes people have been so hurt, they do need to take some time away from being in a church environment because it's so triggering for them. And that was not, I didn't have a category for that before. And I started understanding that, and then started understanding how we got to work so much harder to make our churches safe spaces, so that people, when they're experiencing church hurt, could come to us and it would be a place of healing for them. At some point, I realized from what I was hearing from people and learning that the vocabulary of pastors' affairs wasn't right. Okay, that a pastor has a power differential over people in his church, which means that if he then sleeps with someone, that is not an affair, that is abuse. So with the power differential thing, someone taught me that pastors have a dual relationship with church members, right? On the one hand, they can be their friend, but on the other hand, they're always their leader. So it's a dual relationship. I'd had no idea of this before. I just thought if you're a pastor, you're people's mate. That was how I thought my approach to church leadership was. I didn't realize that whilst I'm thinking, yeah, this person's my mate, they might see me as their mate, but they also see me as their pastor. They see me as having power over them. And so then I started understanding that us pastors really need to be aware of the power we have over people, or we end up hurting people because we're not aware of the power we have. And it's also complex with power differentials because often the leader has all the power, but at times you can have groups in churches who aren't the leaders and they end up having power over the leaders. So one of the reasons why some church leaders have been reluctant to talk about power differentials in the UK is because they're worried that people then won't believe them when they say they got bullied in their churches. But sometimes you get cliques in churches that end up with power and they can bully the pastor. Sometimes the pastor's power gets less when things happen to him, like if he has health problems, that can really reduce your power. I've also experienced personally that when you share your abuse story with someone, if you share it with someone for the first time and you really struggle to share it, you are giving that person tremendous power, and they can really crush you with that if they abuse that trust. Because one of the ways that power works is in terms of trust. I should also mention that I was doing my doctorate during all of this, and because of what happened with the whole crisis with Broken Hearted by Many Paper Cuts, I actually changed a lot of my doctorate because I now realize that some of the training I given other people, some of the discipleship I given other people wasn't sufficient. And I found Diane Langberg's work on what it means to be a person, to be an image bearer, to have voice and have power and relationship. I found that really helpful. And then that got me thinking more and more about how we use power. And then I did a biblical theology of power and how throughout the Bible, God wants us to use our power to serve and protect other people. So then somewhere along the line, I made the narcissism video, which I had no idea it would be so popular on YouTube. For someone like me, who's not like a big name, the video, was really popular, and people started contacting me, telling me about their stories and about the pain. People from America, people from the UK, people from my own broader constituency in the UK, people who are afraid to speak out publicly. There's a lot of fear. And people who'd experienced a lack of due process. And they'd say, look, the organization we're part of says there's a process, but from what we experienced of it, the process is not fit for purpose, and we got really badly hurt through it. So I started seeing as well more of the fear culture that there is in the UK. I also got some flack from the video, and in the video where I comment about a pastor bragging about physically threatening someone, and on Twitter I was asked about this person, and I said this person is in the FIEC, is speaking at FIEC or Acts 29 conferences, because someone said, did anything happen to them? And it's like, no, nothing's happened to them. They are still seen as someone who people follow. So I got some pushback from that, which again was a red flag about our constituency. People were more bothered that I'd said something about that than the actual abuse. So I also, along with this and other stuff, I was witnessing ongoing harshness from church leaders. And I recognized that because I'd done the same so much, and seeing, oh, this is a feature of being harsh, and us not realizing that that's wrong. And then we had the Timis scandal come out, and very little was done about it, and there was a lot of defensiveness about it, which was a huge red flag. It should have been a time to repent, to look within and be like, we need outsiders to come in and help us see all our blind spots, all the ways that the system it is conducive to abuse. But I'm sure there were some changes, but I witnessed a lot of defensiveness about it. And then we had the Fletcher scandal. And before this, I'd come across the Smythe scandal. And I was shocked that the Smythe scandal has been covered up for so long. And shocked that people who I know of who didn't seem to do anything about it. So big red flags. And with the Fletcher scandal, again, we still see to today a lack of transparency. I mean, the news of the Fletcher scandal came out a while ago now, right? And such a lack of transparency in that time, such defensiveness, from senior leaders, and a lack of understanding about how abuse operates. People who've had plenty of time now to really learn about how abuse operates, there's still a lack of understanding on that. So those are all like the red flags there, right? And that convinced me that we all need to be aware of the power that we have, okay? And we need to use it to serve and protect. Some of you will know from the Urban Ministry program that was a big theme that I taught on, about the power that Adam was authorized to use was to serve and protect, from the two Hebrew words, avad and shema, in the garden, right? And that's a theme all the way through the Bible, serve and protect. So I already had that in terms of in my brain, mentally, what we need to do. But now it just became so much more clear and really fell down to my heart even more. Like, we need to be serving and protecting. The way power is used is all wrong, and it convinced me that we need to repent of our harshness, our defensiveness, our misogyny. Probably my biggest failing as a church leader has been to not tackle misogyny better. I've tried over the years to deal with times where I felt I've seen misogyny, and I feel like I haven't done a good enough job. Like, it's such a big thing, and I'm still trying to learn and work out how we tackle this. What part do I need to play in that? And we need sheep-centric training, not leader-centric training. So the sheep, someone told me the other day, they said the sheep are the most valuable commodity, not the shepherd. If we were talking in terms of commodities, it's not that in the ancient Near East, it wasn't the shepherds who were valuable, it was the sheep. And the way I've been trained has made it seem like the leader is the most valuable person in the church. And he's not. He's just a shepherd. The sheep are the valuable ones. We should have like a triangle that's upside down, and the shepherd's at the bottom and the sheep are at the top, right? And then like deacons just like above the shepherd, and they're serving people and protecting people. And I'm convinced that we need a better understanding of abuse and how abuse functions, so that we can be safer churches and places where people can heal from abuse. We need to be transparent and not defensive when we're asked difficult questions. And all in all, I think we need a new paradigm of church ministry, a new paradigm of church growth, new paradigm of how we train people to serve well in churches, and a new paradigm of how we handle abuse. So that's my story of my journey of a paradigm shift about power and about Christian ministry. I'm hoping it was beneficial. My desire is not to moan and complain. My desire is to see change. My desire is to see change, and I do hear from particularly the younger pastors in my personal experience, hearing from pastors in their 40s and 30s, I'm hearing people say, we know there needs to be change. We want to see change. And I'm sure there's older pastors as well, but I just haven't heard from them about this. And so I think, let's do it. Let's do it. But we got to be honest. We got to be honest about all the rot. You know, we got to be honest about the rot and stop saying it's a few bad apples and instead say we got a rotten tree and ask for God to help us.